The new RIDGID and Delta Cruzer dual bevel sliding miter saws are undoubtedly very cool, at least in theory. I've had my RIDGID now for over 6 months, and I'd like to share my thoughts so far and whether or not I'd recommend you go buy one. And there is one major issue that you should be aware of. Let's get to it. And right off the bat, just so you know, I bought this saw as well as any other saw I referenced in this video with my own money. I'm in no way affiliated with RIDGID or Delta, so every opinion expressed in this video is mine. All right, so what we have here is the RIDGID 4251 dual bevel sliding miter saw, or the Delta version, the 26-2251. And with an MSRP, at least currently as of August 2022, $549 and current sale price of $399, this is a pretty enticing purchase for hobbyists such as myself, considering this is at the lower end of the compact sliding miter saw category. And by compact, this is what I mean. You can see that it's designed to be almost flush up against this back wall, which makes it super easy to integrate in existing miter station designs. Most traditional sliding miter saws have the two bars that are sticking out the back, which makes it really tough to get it up close to a wall and requires the need for a much deeper stand or platform to use. Now the RIDGID that I have is the 12-inch version of this saw, but there is a smaller 10-inch version of the same miter saw, shown here as the Delta Cruzer. Now both saws have the exact same 15-amp belt-driven motor system that spins the blade up to 4,000 RPM. Now it's worth noting that both sizes of these saws boast the highest crosscut capacity in their respective classes. You see, I can crosscut up to 17 inches on this saw, which is a monstrous 10 inches more than my previous saw. Though I will say this seems a touch misleading because the largest crosscut capacity that I'm measuring is about 14 inches. Apparently there's some way to remove this and back your workpiece up, and even then I still don't really know how it would work because the blade only comes down so far. Either way, still a lot. It's 14 inches right out of the box, 17.8 inches if you do something special. And if you're curious, the smaller 10-inch version of this saw has a rated crosscut capacity of 15.8 inches, but when I measure, it only comes out to be 12.5 inches. So take that for what it's worth. The maximum cut thickness on the larger 12-inch saw is 6.5 inches and 6.25 inches on the 10-inch saw, so surprisingly close there. Now both versions have a maximum 52-degree miter to the left and 60 degrees to the right, with 11 and positive stops in between at all of the common angles. And like most miter saws, it will snap into place at those angles, making it accurate and repeatable, though you can set it at any angle and it will lock tightly in place there as well. Even when I hit this thing with a dead blow mallet, it's not going anywhere. And for the bevel, you get a full 48-degree travel in both directions with upfront controls paired with this back lever that makes adjustment really easy. And again, there's positive stops at all of the common angles. The total weight of the 12-inch saw is 59 pounds and 52 pounds for the smaller 10-inch saw, which is really only important if you plan on lugging this thing around a job site. Now for overall size, the 12-inch model has a total depth of about 30 inches. That's from the front of this handle all the way to the back of the saw, a total width of just under 26 inches, and a total height of just under 27 inches. The smaller 10-inch model has a total depth of 29.5 inches, so not much different than the bigger brother, a total width of 22.5 inches, and a total height of just under 24 inches. All of these measurements are, of course, without the optional extension bars mounted on the sides. Keep these numbers in mind if you've got limited space that you need to fit one of these saws. That right there might dictate which model you actually go with, other than, of course, the price. The 10-inch model is about $100 cheaper than the 12-inch. And one of my favorite features, spoiler alert, is the LED work light and shadow line. It not only sheds some light on your work, but also allows you to quickly set up cuts by referencing that shadow line against your cut line. That shadow LED is turned on and off with this switch here at the top of the handle next to the power switch and safety switch. Now when it comes to accuracy and square, everything on my saw was dead on out of the box. But if something was off, it's really easy to adjust pretty much everything on this saw, like most miter saws. You can adjust the fence alignment with some screws in the back. Both the miter and the bevel gauge have adjustability. So I'd always recommend you test everything when you pull the saw out of the box, but if by chance something is off, it's easy to fix. Now, although I have the RIDGID, it does not come with the once standard lifetime warranty. And this is because it's actually manufactured by DPEC, or Delta Power Equipment Company. Hence why this and the Delta Cruzer are actually the exact same saw, if you haven't figured that out by now. DPEC is then a wholly owned subsidiary of Chang Type Industrial Company Limited. Yeah, got that right. Which is a Taiwan-based manufacturing company that makes power tools, just in case you wanted the whole lineage and bloodline. But anyway, getting back to the warranty, this saw actually comes with a 5-year warranty, which is honestly pretty good for the power tool category. So I mentioned that I've had the chance to use and test this saw for the past 6 months. I even managed to improve one aspect of it, which we'll talk about. So what I'll do now is I'll break down some of the things that I really like about the saw and then some things that I don't like so much. And we'll wrap it up with a conclusion and whether or not I would even recommend you go buy one. Okay, so let's start with the good. The first one has got to be the capacity per unit footprint, if that's a thing. This thing is an absolute beast considering it fits in such a small space. In fact, I was able to put it in the existing miter station that had my previous miter saw, which was just a standard DeWalt chop saw. So I was effectively able to double just about every capacity of the saw in the same footprint. And then when you layer on the low price point, it kind of becomes a no-brainer, at least on paper. Although I haven't had to use the massive crosscut capacity on this thing yet, it's kind of nice knowing that I have it available. Now the next feature that I think sticks out as one of the best has got to be the shadow line. Now some miter saws out there have a laser line to show you where it's going to cut. However, they do need to be calibrated at times and are less accurate with very thick material. They also don't accurately account for the kerf of the actual blade you're using. A shadow line, on the other hand, shows you a real representation of where that blade sits just above your workpiece, meaning that you don't have to calibrate it and you certainly don't have to account for the different kerf thicknesses of whatever blade you're using. Now I know this sounds like a small detail, but hear me out. If you're making a lot of cuts on a miter saw, being able to quickly get your piece positioned will save you incremental time, which adds up to a lot of time off of a project. I'm frankly a little surprised how much I actually like this feature. I didn't think I would. I've never had it on a previous miter saw, but now I kind of don't feel like I can live without it. And the last awesome feature I'll call out is the amazingly buttery smooth sliding action. Now at first glance, when you look at this saw with the dual kind of angled arms, you wouldn't probably think this is the case. But I'm telling you right now, whoo, this is smooth. You can see that I can pretty easily go back and forth with just one finger. Doesn't take a lot of force here. Plus you can further dial in the joint resistance with these small little set screws on each arm to get that perfect buttery smooth action. One very important thing that this smooth action does is makes making accurate cuts very easy, which we'll talk about shortly. And now for the not so good. It just wouldn't be an honest review without the bad stuff because let's face it, every tool has drawbacks. And the first, and in my opinion, the biggest drawback of the saw has got to be the dust collection, or maybe more accurately, the dust sprayer. Because the stock dust collection for this thing honestly feels like a confetti machine for your shop, except you're not celebrating anything. You just have to clean it up. I actually did a test earlier where I removed the existing chute, had no vacuum hooked up, and did the exact same test with the vacuum hooked up to the existing chute. And it looked the same. It's almost like the engineering team just forgot to do it before releasing the design. Okay everybody, miter saw deadline is tomorrow. Let's run down the checklist. Okay, we've got bendy arm technology. Killer job, you guys. Those arms are super bendy. Shadow LED line group. Nailed it. On the nose. Okay, we've got some other ones. And dust collection. Where are we at? So you guys have nothing. Guys, you had 6 months. What is that? Is that an onion? What are we gonna do with an onion? That's what you came up with. You put some tape on a little plastic thing? Is that your solution? You know what? No one cares about dust collection, doesn't matter. Ship the whole thing, whatever. But luckily, someone out there actually does care, and I've got a solution for it. I finally came up with this small, unassuming part that bolts into both the 10-inch and 12-inch versions. There's a different design for each that takes the place of the existing chute that comes with your saw and greatly improves the dust collection efficiency. Now, it's not perfect by any means, but it does cut the dust down by 80 to 90%. I have no way of accurately measuring that. That's just kind of what it looks like. And based on the majority of the reviews of people who've actually bought one and put it to use, they seem to experience similar results. If you do eventually go with this saw, I would really recommend you pick this up. They'll be linked down below if you want to go check them out. But if dust in the workshop isn't a big deal for you, or you're constantly lugging this thing around to a job site, maybe it's not worth it. But if you're like me and you do work in your garage, you'll be glad you got one. The next not so good feature that sticks out to me is the off-center base and clearance needed around the bottom to facilitate the maximum miters in both directions. Let me show you. Now, you could look at the 52 and 60 degree maximum miters as a benefit, and for a lot of people it is. But in order to make that happen, they had to offset the cut line away from the center line of the saw. This means when mitering in one direction or the other, you need quite a bit of clearance on each side of the saw. Now, I can get around this by scooting the saw way up to get that clearance, or I would need to incorporate some pretty steep relief angles to clear the arm as it's swinging in either direction. Both of those options aren't really great for me, so I'm kind of limiting my miter capacity to one side because I can get a full 45 degrees here, which hasn't bit me yet, but it's definitely not ideal. If you do plan on putting this saw or the smaller 10-inch into your miter station, just keep that in mind. And finally, the negative that everyone is curious about for any sliding miter saw, but in particular this one, is the head deflection during cuts, which impacts overall accuracy. Now you can see with the saw head locked in the down position, if I extend all the way out and put a little bit of force at the end of the handle, I can create some deflection. And to be honest, it really doesn't take much force to get it to move at all. Now, unfortunately, the laws of physics and mechanical properties means that one of the downsides or trade-offs with this ridiculous crosscut capacity is some deflection in the head. But before you freak out, I've got some points to make here. Point number 1, every single sliding miter saw has some deflection when fully extended. Here is the 12-inch Bosch Axial Glide sliding miter saw, and you'll see if I get the arms fully extended and do the same test on this saw, there is in fact deflection there as well. You could argue it's a little bit less, but regardless, the blade does deflect when fully extended. And here is the wildly popular DeWalt DWS 779 or 780. This one even has the traditional dual bar setup that makes this thing super deep, so you would think it would be even more rigid. But doing the same test, locking the head down, pulling it out, guess what? There is some deflection. Even the almighty Festool Capex has some deflection as well. The key takeaway here, for me at least, is if you're after ultimate precision, probably shouldn't be using a miter saw. Ask any skilled woodworker out there, because I sure as hell ain't one. If they need a perfect glue joint or a perfect 90-degree cut, chances are they're gonna be doing that with some sort of crosscut sled on a table saw. Much more accurate, much more repeatable. Point number 2, you can drastically cut down on the deflection during a cut by just not being a gorilla when you're doing the cut. If you're using a ton of force during a cut on any miter saw, chances are that you're doing something wrong and doing something pretty dangerous. That buttery smooth action that we talked about earlier means you don't have to overpower the saw when making a cut, which should make it more accurate. I'm able to get very repeatable cuts on this thing, even when fully extended, by just not treating it like a piece of workout equipment. And finally, point number 3, the deflection is worst when we're fully extended, when in reality, most of our cuts happen right here. There's a lot less deflection with the head all the way back, and by locking it in this position, it turns into just a standard chop saw. So if accuracy is what you're after, I would leave the head locked back in that position. And if you want to get accurate cuts on wider pieces, I would just use something else. That is my honest take. I spent a lot of time arranging the 3 things that I like and that I don't like to make sure it really lined up with my experience. Hopefully that helps you in weighing the pros and cons and making your ultimate decision. So in summary, I truly think that this thing is a slam dunk in terms of value for your shop. If you were to somehow plot a single value on a chart that represented capacity, footprint, and price, I think this thing stands on its own. Are there things that can be improved? Yes. Luckily, one of those is done, which is dust collection. When it comes to whether or not I recommend this saw or the smaller 10-inch version to somebody, the answer is, it depends. If you're a fine furniture maker, a cabinet maker, or maybe even a trim carpenter, probably not the right saw for you. Though I'd argue if you're making high-end furniture, you wouldn't be caught dead with a RIDGID in your shop anyways. Festool for life. If you're a hobbyist, a weekend woodworker, or a garage conquistador, I think there's a pretty compelling argument for this saw. And if you're a tradesman or a carpenter where you're cutting mostly construction goods, it's a no-brainer. I can tell you from experience, of all the different miter saws I have in my shop currently, this is by far the easiest one to carry around. Not that it's easy, it's just easiest. There you have it, folks. Take that information and do with it what you want. Would I recommend this saw to a buddy? Yes. Assuming that buddy isn't a wildly successful fine furniture maker. You're probably also wondering, why in the heck do I have so many damn miter saws in my shop? And the reason is twofold. The main reason I bought them is so that I can develop improved dust collection for all of the most common sliding miter saws out there. But I also figured that while I have them all in one spot, why not do a comparison video, which I plan to do at some point in the future. And since no one else is stupid enough to spend $3,000 on miter saws just to compare them, you get to benefit from my stupidity. That video should be pretty helpful for anyone looking to add a sliding miter saw to their shop, specifically one of the compact ones that seem to do well in a garage woodshop type environment. Now that video obviously isn't out at the time of filming this video, but if you want to be made aware of when it does come out, hit subscribe. While you're down there, hit like, and put a comment down below on what you thought of this video. Maybe something I missed, or something else you'd like to have answered. Thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed it. See you next time. That didn't feel right, did it? It didn't for me either. As always, continue to pursue shop greatness.